Welcome back to the second part of this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team at the Learning Effect. In the second part of our conversation with Nick Court from the People Experience Hub, we pick up on the question of what does the data really tell us about what our people think about learning and development in our organisations? We obviously have access to lots of data people have around learning. So we hear all of this rhetoric in the learning space about, what the greatest thought leaders think you should be doing. And, my cynical side said they're also then 3 weeks later partner with a tech provider who happens to miraculously solve that problem. But, looking from your perspective, what are you seeing as some of those things people are, feeding back on in learning, or the trends in learning and development? What's that slightly impartial view on this?
So I guess, if I look at the data, I've got it in front of me. So learning and development is a broad concept here. So we'll talk about growth, we'll talk about opportunity. So we're only half of people we surveyed said that they'd actually received training to ensure they were really competent in their role. Yeah. And if we think about autonomy, mastery being a key human need, an enabler of employee engagement to motivate people, I want to be the best that I can be at the job that I do, then I need to be competent and I need to receive training to ensure that I'm competent. Only 51% of people actually said that they had that competency level training in the job that they were doing, or enough of it. Only 43% of people said that their manager actually took time out to talk to them about their progress, their opportunities, what they wanted to do. So that personalization piece that says the individual feels personalized too. Is that right? Is that how I don't know how you'd say that. Personalized too. That's how we're going to go with it. You could probably put some tech in that says, tell me what you want, but people want to tell somebody what they need. Less than a third said that someone at work actually encouraged them to develop. So only 30% said that there was somebody who's encouraging me to do more, to be better, to learn and develop. And in terms of the people that said managers didn't take time to talk about their growth, it's an employee problem. 61% of employees said that. It was 50% of managers that said that, but 61% of employees said that their manager didn't take the time out. Now, does that play into what we were talking before about that personalization and are managers specialists or generalists? So how can you help them do that? Maybe a manager is feeling less comfortable. They're the pinch point in the hourglass. But we do know from our data that growth, learning, development is a motivator. So if you want motivated employees that are going to come to work with high energy and are going to be driven to deliver the results, then where we saw low scoring growth, learning, development, where we score high scoring advocacy of your company, a 30 percentage point drop where somebody said they had low growth, low learning and development opportunities versus organizations where they said high. That's huge. 30% less people would advocate your company or your organization, your brand. Yeah. In terms of alignment, we saw a 20% drop, low to high. Autonomy, we talked about mastery and autonomy. We saw a 30% drop between low and high. And this stuff is huge, but probably the biggest one, belonging. So we talk about a sense of belonging in an organization. 35% percentage point drop between an organization that scores high, learning development, and low. So does someone care about me when I come to my organization? And if you think about investment in people, investment in growth, opportunity, learning, it's not just about becoming a manager. It's not just about promotion. It is about autonomy and mastery and knowing that you care about me, training me, giving me time, asking me what I need, delivering courses, whatever that looks like. That shows that you care. It's an active proposition that you have, not a passive one.
I think that's some really, really interesting and powerful data there, and I could run in a million different directions with it. But you talked at points there around personalization, about the role of the manager, around what people expect back as well. And you know, in the same way you can put tech in that drives personalization based on what you say you want, what other people do, etc. But, you know, I think it's that back to that hybrid of you just don't want to feel like you're being processed by a robot, and the only thing that's driving that is this robotic thing that's producing another online course for you to do because maybe other people are looking at it. You want that person who's going to, or that feeling of someone taking an interest in you, of personalizing this down to you, of trying to help you achieve your objectives. And maybe there's an opportunity for the tech to help the managers better to do that and help build those understanding of roles and relationships. And that's maybe not the quickest, easiest one out of the box. That's maybe about thinking of all of the way that you approach learning, the whole way that fits into your business. So yeah, I think some massively powerful numbers coming out there, and I know they're generalized with all these things, but I think as some key messages for people across learning, that's really important.
And it's got to be, I mean, it's got to be a mixture, hasn't it, as well? You know, I'm not a learning expert, but in my head I kind of go, what would tech be amazing at? I guess compliance in an organization. So if I need everyone to have the same experience, to have the same course, to really understand something, food safety, health and safety, manufacturing processing, risks, lone worker assessments, I need people to have the same experience every single time they complete this, because I need to be sure that the training that's being delivered is being received in the same way. I guess tech could probably enable that. Tech could take something and take the tutor out of that, or the learning deliverer out of that, and say, you know, we're going to take away that learner being on a bad day. We're going to take away that learner forgetting something, or the learning delivery person forgetting something. We're going to make sure that it is deliverable. And it's kind of going, actually, that's just nuts and bolts of the business. But where we want people to personalize and have, or a strategic approach to growth in our business, that has to have a human sitting behind it, thinking about it and thinking about different ways of delivering. The other thing about personalization that I'm unsure about technology is, what if someone's dyslexic? What if somebody's blind? What if somebody's hard of hearing? What if somebody has any other type of disability? What if someone's uncomfortable with technology? I once rolled a time and attendance solution out many years ago, and I remember training an individual who'd never used a mouse before. And when I said, you know, click the mouse, they clicked the mouse. They just tapped it. They tapped the mouse, and they didn't know how to use a mouse. How does tech overcome that without a person to sit there and say, okay, there's a different learning need here. Let me adapt.
Yeah, I remember back to one of my first roles in learning was training 3,000 people how to use a new till system, when most of them had never used any technology before. And, you know, you'd had the one person who'd predominantly been responsible in certain departments. You know, you'd had people who've been in the role 20, 30 years, and, you know, this was back end of 90s. So, you know, this was very early in tech, and you literally had people who didn't have a clue. You had to completely change your language, and you've still got that right across the piece, but that it ultimately gets in the way of them doing anything before that, you know, because that fear and everything else takes over. But I think I'm picking back to some of those things you've talked about and what tech can do. Tech can actually help with all of those things if it's part of a well thought through system, if it's not just put in. So, you know, you talked about people not having, you know, the skills training or to do their role. Now that's fundamental and basic, but, you know, most organizations will probably provide, you know, the salespeople are the most important, or the customer service people are the most numerous, or whatever it happens to be. And therefore you get training targeted to those people. But what about for everyone else? What can we do to truly help those people? Because buying a LinkedIn learning library is not going to help that problem for most people, you know, but that's an easy solution. But it's actually more difficult to sometimes solve those things, and involves engagement. And you know, creating purpose, creating that ability for someone to learn in the way they need, or have access to the support you need. Again, you talked about dyslexia and various other things, but to open up opportunities for people, and the tech shouldn't be the barrier. I think there's so many things we can do well, but tech is not sitting in isolation in any of those solutions. If it does, it's probably not going to work as well as you need it to, because we're humans interacting with tech. Tech can open up collaboration and sharing of best practice, but if you don't reward that, if that isn't how your culture works, it's not going to work. So there's so many things linked together, and that might help you be better at your job if you knew what the best people were doing, if you had access, if people were encouraged to share best practice, if your rewards were around team. You can't just put it in isolation and go, right, we're going to share everything amongst the sales team, but we've got a competitive reward structure, and there's no other systems around that. But I've seen all of those things happen because the tech can do it, but the tech doesn't do it if it doesn't fit into the system of work.
Yeah, and I think you're right to celebrate some of the stuff that tech does, because it enriches, it enables, it enhances, and there's some stuff which it's faster, it's quicker. And you're absolutely right. It can level that playing field between people of high wealth and people who are of moderate wealth. The same tech, the same solutions being deployed to people, the same opportunities are now available, irrelevant of geography, irrelevant of location or ability in that location, or whatever that looks like. I also think that particularly in learning, one of the things I'm seeing, and again, it might be a view that is limited because I'm not an expert, so I'm just seeing it in organizations where I've worked, particularly in something around, say, people analytics, which is a growing area, is gone are the cookie cutter approaches to HR analytics training. It's now actually, what does this individual need? What does this individual need? Gone are the days when you've got 3 HR analysts and all of them have to go on the same course. Well, actually, you may have a high-flying HR analyst who's never going to be a manager, who needs to be or wants to be the best technical expert they can. So send them down the technical route, learn from technical people about data and how data is stored, about how to manipulate the data and how to get insights from that data. You might have another HR analyst who's probably where they need to be to do their job, but they want to go down the managerial route. They want to manage technical people. So send them down a different training route. Not everyone has to achieve the same level in an organization. It is about understanding that personal approach and what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And taking that as a microcosm, that's been one of the challenges for L&D for years, is that often the only way of developing was up. Therefore, go on training, it's manager training, or it's some health and safety training, or it's where we've got budget for. But you're then turning around and going, that person's contribution, their belonging, everything else actually to help that technical person develop is now achievable. Tech can help support that, because you're looking down to an organization of 2,000 people. Without tech, how do you navigate that? How do you open up? How do you get to know those people? It's an avenue to help do that, and you can do it through a people process and structure, but you're then reliant on every manager within that as well. And certainly when I've looked at talent, been in talent roles in big organizations before, you are looking down into a muddy pool and you are reliant on the managers actually telling you who that is. But the tech can open up that, they can clarify the water, it can help you see the blockages in that, it can help you work out, here's a little talent factory here, here's a manager producing loads of people through into a technical route, into a managerial route, just people who are generally energized. And then you find this one over here, we never see what's going on under there. Are there some great people under there? Are there not? So there's lots of things tech can do to enable an organization to tackle lots of those challenges, but it's got to be collective. It can't be the one-off, the tech solution. But there is some amazing tech out there. There is some absolute pap as well.
I've got a question for you actually. So my broad statement is, and obviously as a provider of employee feedback, I would say this, which is, having great employee feedback lets you explore that, so you can see where somebody is less than satisfied, less than happy in their learning development journey, their growth opportunity. Is there a challenge for organizations where I as an individual can now access so many learning platforms outside of my organization, whether that is something like Udemy selling a £14 course on learning Python programming, or just YouTube, and going out and learning how to do something myself because my organization hasn't trained me. Is that going to produce a challenge to those cookie cutter organizations that are not thinking about personalization or not thinking about leveraging their L&D?
I think it does. I think what's happened is learning was traditionally about content and control. So looking as to where it's going, content is now, there's so much content out there. And, you've talked a lot in this about context, and we talk a lot about context as well. So content could, generic content can help you in certain things, but contextual understanding and putting that into practice. So you'll see a lot of people go out there and they'll find if their organization isn't doing something, they can go on a Udemy course, a LinkedIn course. They can they can effectively get badge after badge, and there's transferable badges you can now put all over your LinkedIn and whatever, and you can be the most qualified person, but it's opportunity and putting those things into practice as well that are key. And what we're seeing in the best organizations is they're not just buying those off the shelves. Some of them are linking to lots of libraries because it opens up content, but they're actually thinking that learning is broader than that. Learning is an opportunity to work on a project. Learning is an opportunity to put something in practice, to take part in an event where you challenge your thinking on how this could be, or you put your creative thinking into place, or you take those again, it's old school stuff, but you take that champion role, you take something else, because those opportunities to put your skills in practice are absolutely key. But yeah, there was the control of content. There is so much out there, but again, there's good, bad and indifferent within that, and unfortunately a lot of people spend a lot of time chasing content, when actually if they spent more time opening up opportunity, conversation, those things that an organization can do. And for people who are developing themselves, I would say again, spend as much time on relationships and understanding different contexts and challenging your skills and networking as you do on those more formal bite-sized bits of courses that you can do. Because in my honest view, and I've said this time and time again, I think courses kill your, courses and content kill your learning strategy, or kill your organizational learning strategy, because you're trying to go back to that, put it in a structure. I have to get something and tell you what you need to learn. And yeah, for certain things, that's clearly the case. If I need to follow a process, or I'm new to a subject, I want to follow a pathway, I want someone to guide me. But the more I start to develop my understanding and skill, open up opportunities, open up conversations, empower others around me to help me. And that's where personalization comes from. It doesn't come from an algorithm or a bit of machine learning, or certainly not at the moment. Some of those are very rudimentary. The dream sounds great, but the reality is we're still a human connected, organization world, and some learning platforms do connection great. They really help people understand, but again, if those people aren't willing to give, or if that one person in the organization now has 100 people asking them a question about this, it's thinking through how that works in practice.
And I mean, it's interesting. I'm fascinated by some of this stuff, and I think about one of our wellbeing stats, which is 20% of people say that they don't have the time to deliver the work that they have to do in the time given to them, and that's the aggregated 20% of managers. Line managers, 35% said that they don't have the time to deliver the work that they have to do in the time given to them. And my immediate thing when we think about learning is, I'm going, well, how does that person give time to development, their own personal development, their learning, they're supporting other people to develop? So if we're talking about a nice network of people supporting people, understanding context, understanding needs, if we're filling people's time up with work and more work, and then we should expect 51% of people said that they haven't received all that training, that 43% of people haven't had the manager talking to them. Maybe the outcome of, you know, a work environment is that actually everything else just becomes harder.
And I think it does. If you know, everything slips, you know, the amount of times going back to when I was running, you know, training in classrooms, the amount of times people don't turn up because of something urgent in work, you know, and firstly, that's because the learning isn't properly positioned and it isn't urgent. But also it's thinking about how you make learning relevant to people and make them take that time, because I might be in a work culture, but actually I might be really inefficient in some of the things I'm doing, and I just can't take my head above the parapet, or I don't have even the time to, you know, have a buddy, or, you know, you might have a buddy in induction, but do you actually have someone who comes in and goes, and we're all like that in our jobs, aren't we? We can't see the wood for the trees. You know, someone just coming in and helping us every so often can spur that on, but managers aren't doing that because they're too busy doing work, and managing isn't really a thing, and coaching and getting alongside. So, you know, there's a problem there in work as well, but then there's a problem in positioning it and going, if we're trying to run everyone at 100% capacity, we're not going to grow, we're not going to innovate. But, you know, stripping that down, and some people do it in a very structured fashion. They'll go, okay, right, we're going to have every Friday, you can have the afternoon to do your own personal learning. But without knowing what you're meant to do with that time, you'll just refill it with work, you know, because you don't value the learning. And, you know, I spoke to an organisation a while ago, and they'd happened upon, they didn't design it, but they happened upon a solution that was really working for them. So they had this mandated personal training time, and they were looking at it across the organisation, and then they found they had the teams that were working in sprints, and they were working in a collaborative way, in that sort of agile sprint fashion. The way they were working was throwing out learning needs every week. They were throwing out, I need to go and find more about that. I don't know enough about that. So the way they were working was throwing out the learning needs, and they were found that they were using that learning time massively more effectively and for learning, because they knew the way their work was happening required that level of rethinking and re-engagement on an ongoing basis. Where they were looking at the teams that were just in a normal way of work, they were going, we'll fill it with work, we'll go to the golf course, we'll do something. You know, they were not actually using it for learning because there wasn't any need or purpose. And yeah, you've got some self-motivated learners, but for most people, they just couldn't see it. They couldn't see the relevance of that time to themselves. And people were going through courses because it was like watching Netflix. You know, they were the organisation required them to do some learning, so they were doing some learning, but they weren't finding the impact of that. So they put a structural piece in, but the rest of the structure to drive the need wasn't there. And that was the next bit. They were then starting to work with their managers and people to understand, how do you then identify how to spend that time well, because that was a missing skill in their organisation.
I mean, that really does sound interesting, and I can almost imagine it going, you know, there's a gap, something's happened, we move fast, we run in sprints, we've got clear stuff that we're working on, there's a gap. Can I fill the gap with learning? Can I fill the gap with somebody else who has the skills? So can I learn the skills, or actually do we ignore the gap, and will the problem just go away, or is the problem here to stay and will bog us down in the future? And you can, in a fast sprint environment, you can log that, and you know, I don't know if there's tech that could do that, but that sounds absolutely like something that you could quickly chuck into some tech and say, while we're working, we've recognized this learning gap, you know, log it while we're busy getting on with something else. Because I think that's what happens with line managers in a non-sprint environment. They recognize the learning gap, the skill gap, whatever it could be, but then the next thing comes along and they've got to tackle that, and they've got to tackle that, and then probably the following week or the following day, or later that day, they'll see the skills gap, learning gap appear again. But all of a sudden, you know, I'm out on the shop floor, I'm not in the environment to log it, and it's not hugely important, but it keeps popping up, and I don't have a vehicle to solve that.
And you know, pushing that back to really rudimentary, you know, back to some of the things we've talked about in the past on analytics. You know, once a month someone's doing a report, and it takes them 2 days to do it, when actually if they did a bit of Excel training, or they knew, they sat with someone who knew what they were doing to help guide them on a different way, that could maybe take 2 hours. But they have that 2 days as a deadline. It's too difficult to learn that now. But then it disappears, and then suddenly we're at next month again. And then you're 6 years later and you've been wasting 2 days a month for 6 years. This happens all the time in organizations where there's those micro learning opportunities that appear that we just push back because they're not urgent, and because I'm fully worked and I'm working extra hours, but I don't take that opportunity to enhance my current performance, or maybe I'm just not aware there's a better way of doing it. There's no one saying to me, why are you taking 2 days to do that, put that report together? And we've all come across this when we go into organizations. You just look with fresh eyes at how they're working and go, if only someone had taken the time 2 years ago, and you become that great savior because you just go, you look, and it either gets received really favorably, or you get massive pushback because someone's you're getting their emotion back of, if only I'd known that, or blah, whatever it happens to be. But that happens hundreds of times in every organization every day.
Yeah, and it's that, there's probably people in organizations, I've seen some great organizations where they have, I don't know, they have their intranet set up or whatever they're using, Yammer or whatever. I'm probably talking about old stuff. I feel old when I'm talking about stuff like the intranets. But this is me, this is my job, but this is the stuff that I'm actually expert in. So kind of I used to have it all the time, which would be like, I don't know, I look after this area of the business, but actually, did you know that I can do graphic design and I'm pretty good on Excel? So if you need help on something specifically around design or something around Excel, whilst that's maybe not my core day job today, I'm somebody you can actually go and grab a coffee with. And opening that up in an organization, there's loads of people in organizations doing jobs that isn't their skill set, or something they're fantastic at, that they could share that information. And again, tech can take 1,000 people and suddenly understand what skills have we got out there that are not necessarily that job skills.
Yeah, and there's absolutely tech that does all of those things. It's just that being knitted together right for your organization, being thought about how that's positioned, and people even knowing it's there, or people thinking about the way they can do it. Because again, sometimes platforms capture skills for future roles, but they don't do very much about current, that in-job problem at the moment, to say, you're in a team, did you know that Nick, who sits 3 desks down from you, has actually probably got the answer to this problem, and roll it back into how we're working now. And Nick isn't 3 desks down from you, he's 3 counties down from you, but actually in the same team. And again, it's how do we create that understanding of even being able to go, look, this is something, there's awareness of, I've got a problem in the first place. That's sometimes an issue, isn't it? I don't know that there's a better way, and I'm not in that mindset. That's one thing to challenge. But if I do know I've got a challenge, how do I raise the question? Because I may not even know what the right question is, but I've got a problem. Is anyone help on this area? Anyone come across this before? Or raise a culture where people share their best practice and people search. Because again, if you don't get to 2 sides of that, I've seen it in organizations, everyone can put their best practice out there, but they haven't created a search culture, because they haven't got, you need a critical mass of that being useful, but they don't manage that right the way through to fruition. So it becomes like, I'd love a Google for work, and actually they get halfway to building a Google for work and give up because they don't follow that pattern through. So there's so much that organizations can do, some do, but there's huge opportunities right across the piece.
It's almost, you need to give people explicit permission to be curious. Yeah, be curious, assume, without it saying we need to raise the bar, that continual raise the bar is tiresome, and it smacks of companies needing to save some cash rather than develop people, which will save them some cash. But be curious, if you're doing something, at some point ask yourself, could this be done better? And don't make it personal. Just because you don't have the skill doesn't mean that you can't have the skill in the future, or that someone else in the organization couldn't change one thing about what you do. that would make your life different, better, or take task away. We grow task organically, and I think that being curious about stuff is, when I see that in an organization where they have lots of curious people who ask not offensive questions, but just probing questions, and then go and find some stuff out for themselves and have the time to do that, that's where innovation happens. Yeah, and that innovation doesn't have to be world-beating innovation. It can just be innovation for that organization, for that person. This is innovative for me. Yeah, and that's where it'll happen.
Yeah, and it comes back to me always about customer or outcome. So microcosm of what things that have always irritated me or driven me to make change is inefficiency and poor service or poor things happening. So you go into an organization and you raise the challenge because something hasn't worked for you, and you get the response of "that's not my job" or "that's there," and you see that person dealing with the same complaint 50 times a day because the process is not customer friendly. And the organizations where they're empowered to fix it, and the organizations where they just aren't, or they just don't. And that's not an individual level, that's at an organizational level. And you can see that when you interact with organizations, and you see that this is someone who doesn't fit that organizational culture because they're normally fixing these problems, down to this organization is just not where someone sees beyond their silo, has a view that there might be a better, is curious about different ways of doing it, sees and is wondering, why am I getting 3 complaints on this week, or why is this customer not understanding this, and either doesn't have the time, the motivation, or the empowerment, or even the connection to be able to go back and ask that question. And that at a most basic level is where having a learning, curious or other culture helps you enhance what you do for your customers, and that feeds right the way through.
And you use the word culture there, and it's interesting actually. So one of the things Rob in the team always talks about is culture and climate. So having a culture, an aspirational culture of your organization, the culture of it, and then having a climate which could be localized. So the climate in a team, the climate in a business unit, and that can be driven by one great person, one bad person. It's the climate could be one where curiosity is stifled. The culture of the organization is one where we want it. And again, circling back to the feedback stuff, this is where those huge surveys, plug and play solutions, they're not really exploring that. They're not understanding, where is this, where do we need to go to solve this? So if we're saying that the climate in this location is not as great as it could be, learning and development, curiosity is stifled, go there. Don't go where it's not a problem. Don't mandate it to a whole organization when all you need to do is solve a problem in one location. And that's kind of what data and employee feedback data will give you. Combine that with, I was just looking at exit data as well, 45% of people leave an organization because of opportunities, growth, learning, development, frustrations around the fact that they can't progress, and they're less than satisfied with what's happening, so they go to another organization where they can. And whether that's somebody's using my skills, who's going to use my skills and who's going to let me have that freedom, they will leave ultimately, and the cost of that is high. So I do think it's something that organizations should be thinking about and in the mix. So it's kind of like well-being's important, belonging's important, learning, development, it's all important. Yeah, so give it some measure, give it some weight, and then go and find out which bit do you need to do where. Well-being here, belonging here, growth, learning, development over here.
I think that's absolutely critical, and I think one of the other points I've taken away from this conversation is you can't do it without actually trying and putting some effort in, and it can't be that easy solution, whichever one of those, whether you're in charge of recruitment or engagement or learning or any other aspect of HR or the role, you've got to put that effort in, not just to put the system in or just follow the crowd or whatever else. You've got to understand that context, the climate, the culture, all of those things you've talked about.
I've got a poster behind me, which is the Cognitive Bias Codex, and somewhere in that mix will be the Law of Diminished Returns. So if you do something over and over again with the same outcome, eventually you'll see a diminished return, whether that is telling the same joke. The first time you get a laugh, the next time you get a titter, the next time I heard you tell that joke before, you know, whilst it's a humorous joke, I'm not going to laugh. I knew what was coming. And that's exactly the same with, or that's the risk, I think, not the same, because, you know, different environments, different tech, different ways of working. Continual pulse surveys, always on solutions. No action that can respond before the next question is asked. Diminished returns. That's what will kick in.
But I think there's some really positive messages out there about taking control, take that possibility, developing your own hybrid system. There is no one way of doing it, but, you know, work through, get that right partner, get that right support, and you can achieve amazing things.
Yeah, 100%.
Nick, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure we could probably go on for the rest of the day, but just to draw this to a close, we'll finish there. If people do want to connect in with you, follow you, tap into more of your knowledge, or speak to you and the rest of your team, how's the best way of them doing that?
So probably hit me up on LinkedIn. So hit me up on MySpace, hit me up on LinkedIn. Pop on the website, thepxhub.io. If somebody wants to get in touch with the team, there's a contact form on there, or just drop us an email to hello@pxhub.io, and someone would absolutely be delighted to grab a coffee, have a chat. We're not a hard sales organisation. We are absolutely a be there for people organisation. So even if it's just I've got a problem I want to solve, you know, get in touch. We'd love it.
So all of the information about Nick and his team will be in the show notes below the podcast. Nick, thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to catching up soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. You can register to join the Learning Effect community. The link to do so is in the show notes below. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the Learning Effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.